Hello and welcome to the Pick Six Podcast. Evan Bland, Jimmy Watkins, and Sam McKewon. That's me. There's a reason that I'm hosting it this week, and that's because it's the week that we preview Nebraska baseball, and Evan is our expert. And so I go to the question-asking chair, and Evan pontificates. You won't talk nearly as long as I do about literally everything, but you're going to be the person who is in the captain's chair, so to speak, of kind of giving us the down low on not only Nebraska baseball, but Big Ten baseball, and, CWS. Just an early look at the national scene. It's going to be a really interesting season. We wanted to kind of dedicate majority of a podcast just to this, just to talking about Will Bolt's boys and what they can do. Whether they can duplicate what they did last year, win the Big Ten, maybe win a Big Ten tournament, maybe host a regional. Those are kind of the goals that they have. We'll get into that in a second. We're also going to talk a little bit about Nebraska men's basketball. What a wonderful operation that is. The Nebraska women's basketball team had its biggest win of the year on Monday. I'll talk a little bit about where they're at. This is a Thursday when we're recording this, so they're going to play Penn State tonight. I don't know. I think they'll win. Not sure. Curious to see how that game goes, but they play Penn State tonight, so we'll talk a little bit Nebraska women's basketball, and then we will talk a little bit about Adrian Martinez's comments on a recent podcast about his broken jaw and I guess the nature of what's going on in Nebraska football. I will admit at the outset that topic is not as interesting to me as I suspect it is to many, many Husker fans, but I also acquiesce to the demands of the people. So we'll talk about that in a minute, but we'll start with this. Evan, it's Nebraska baseball season. It's here, and I'm happy about that. It was that team gave, I think, Nebraska fans a lot of joy last year. The Huskers have sold out their reserve seats. They are picked to win the Big Ten by the coaches. They are ranked in how many polls? 2, 3?
3 or 4.
Okay. So they're a top 25 team, which people should be reminded that doesn't mean that you're a host or regional team because only 16 teams do that. But they're ranked in the top 25. They are kind of the new hot thing. Will Bolt had a media availability. The captains talked. A bunch of other guys have talked. And so here's the first question, sort of the overview look of what we're talking about right now. As we sit here moving into year 3 of the Will Bolt era, how much does this feel like the beginning of something really big versus maybe a continuation of something that happened last year where you're still trying to figure out what's going on?
Well, it's a weird setup, first of all, because it's his third year, but it's his first regular year, right? The first year was 15 games. COVID wiped it out. Last year was the funky league-only season where they were really good, but they didn't have a chance to prove it against anybody outside their conference. And so I think you could argue, and I would be of this opinion, that they probably came up got the short end of the stick in terms of not being able to host a regional. I thought they were good enough to do it last year. And I wrote about this in sort of the big picture preview for the season. But to me, this is the year where it sort of becomes evident whether Nebraska can be a national program. Because in college baseball, you come across teams, and I think this is true in a lot of sports, where you get a special core of guys and they make a run. Maybe it's 1 year, maybe it's 2 years, whatever. And when those guys move on, what happens? Like, does the program sort of gravitate back to what it was, or does it reload with talent and continue to do what it does? And so that's kind of the lens through which I'm viewing this season is your Big Ten player of the year and the best two-way player in college baseball is not there anymore. Spencer Schwellenbach's gone. Your Friday guy who was a second-round pick and is probably going to be a major league pitcher for many years, Cade Povich, isn't there anymore. Their entire outfield, who had like almost 400 career college starts, all gone. So what do you do? Like, if you're Nebraska, if you're an average program, what that would mean then is Nebraska falls back to, third, fourth in the Big Ten. Maybe they're on the bubble to host a region, or maybe they're on the bubble to make it the tournament. But if they truly are taking that step under Will Bolt and these recruiting rankings mean something and the development piece is there and the culture is there, then they reload and they fill in with some of these younger guys that have developed. And some of these older guys take that next step. I think the rotation's a perfect example of that. Kyle Perry and Shea Shanneman are your co-aces, your 1A and your 1B, as Will Bolt said. So those guys have been okay, good. not great in the past. If those guys can become like anchors, rotational anchors, and come through in big games, you're seeing that development piece. You're seeing a team that maybe can be in the conversation to host a regional, the way that Will Bolt and the staff unabashedly say every year.
Okay. I would say that everything that Evan said just made a lot of sense. And my impression of Big Ten baseball, having done very little looking into it, very little digging, is that when it was football season and you guys would run down to the field first, because I was up doing the Instant Gamers, in the elevator you get stuck with a lot of Nebraska football fans. And everyone's obviously very sad because they lost a lot of games that year. And everyone would just say, well, hey, X many days till baseball season. And it's like, that's college baseball to me has never resonated in that way. I grew up in mostly Ohio, where it's just like, you know, Ohio University made the edges of the NCAA tournament like once while I was there. And college baseball was never really on my radar. So I never really gave it much thought. So the idea that people were looking forward to college baseball season, particularly in a football hub such as Nebraska, with all the tradition that the football program has basked, and they just even like, obviously nothing came of it now, but we did have a basketball season to theoretically look forward to as well during those times. And there was, you know, a lot of juice at the beginning of the season, as we talked about on this podcast many times. It was year 3, their first normal year, big recruiting class, this 5-star kid. No, people were thinking about baseball, and I think that is notable. That is a sea change. That is Will Bolt's direct doing. That's, you know, it's proof to me that it really, like, it doesn't matter what sport you are, really. If you give people a reason to care, if you have success, same thing with Amy Williams' program right now. I mean, They're not world beaters. They might win, a game in the NCAA tournament. That's probably their ceiling. People are excited about it. Like, people around here are excited about that because they're starving. Right. They are starving for a reason to be excited about Nebraska athletics, and baseball is filling that void right now.
Baseball was the first love in this state a long, long time ago, before the football program was great. You know, obviously the college football program in Nebraska was great in the 1920s and the 30s, but baseball was, I guess, the nation's pastime for a very long time. And so people that go back a long, long ways know the barnstorming tours and the quality of baseball and the fact that the College World Series has been here a very long time and it's a big deal and all those things. And then, you know, Nebraska baseball got good right at the same time they opened that park. Mm-hmm. And so they were really good. They obviously made their first College World Series the last year they were at Buck Belzer. Anybody who has ever been there, it's a stadium only a mother could love. Now, I have fond memories of that place with its yellow bleachers and all that, but let's be clear, it's not Haymarket Park. Nebraska got good at the same time that park opened, and it was like that 5 or 6 years when Van Horn and Mike Anderson had it going. It just created this, like, that's the place you had to be. It was like the coolest place in town. They beat Miami one year in a series. You know, they had these huge, massive series against Texas, and it was the coolest thing to go to. And then basketball wasn't very good, and football was going into decline. And so there was a reason why Nebraska baseball kind of hit that moment, and I think it's back to that again. Will Bolt evokes a lot of those memories because he was part of Dave Van Horn's teams. Let's start with the roster and look at the pitching staff. Now, you're right. They lost their pitcher, their ace, Cade Povich. Their Saturday guy was, I think it'd be fair to say, a little bit different than Cade Povich. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they were different and both good, I thought was a beautiful combination. Cade Povich wanted to strike you out. Chance Roach wanted to induce 19 ground balls. That's just what he did. And then they lost the closer. And I think Schwellenbach had a certain swagger about him and all those things, and we've talked about that ad nauseum. When you look now at A, the front half of the starters, B, who's going to be in the bullpen, and C, can they avoid the stupid midweek losses that good teams always avoid because they have good enough pitching for midweek? So talk about the pitchers. I just did a talk about question. The pitching staff.
Right.
What is it like on the front? What is it like in the bullpen? And what is it when you've got to go win a midweek game against a mid-major team?
Yeah. So the depth has been the big theme this offseason. And it sounds kind of weird because they lost 3 arms to the draft. They lost their Saturday starter. And you wonder if they have those elite level guys, the Poviches, who you felt good about facing anybody in the country. The depth of pitching is intriguing to me because even when Nebraska's had good pitching staffs in the past, it's always been like 2 or 3 guys, maybe a bullpen guy or 2, and then it would really fall off. And that showed up in the midweek, like you alluded to, that lack of depth. It showed up in a regional. If Nebraska got to a 2nd or 3rd or 4th game in a regional, they just didn't have the arms left. And if you go to any College World Series out there, any games, you see that the teams that make it there have enough arms to pitch confidently in their 3rd, maybe into their 4th game.
Right.
And Nebraska just hasn't had a lot of that. And maybe they feel like they do this year. And so, like I mentioned, they're kind of 1A, 1B would be Kyle Perry, who's going to get the ball Friday night, Shea Shanneman, who's kind of been a starter and a reliever. He actually came here as a 2-way guy way back when. He's a strikeout sort of guy. Those 2 started big games for Nebraska late last year. I mean, Shanneman was good in the regional. Perry was the starter in the game that Nebraska beat number 1 Arkansas last year. So those guys have been in big games. And then beyond that, Dawson Mccarville was the guy that they elected to give the ball to in Game 3 coming up. He's a Grand Canyon transfer who was a starter for those guys last year, and they were a regional team. He's kind of, I guess, a blend of those 2. He'll strike out some. Didn't have a great fall, but he has some experience, and that's valuable to them. And then
surprised the Texas A&M guy didn't break into that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because McCarville, of the entire baseball roster, McCarville's the only guy who is definitely done after this year in terms of eligibility. Everybody else, in theory, could come back. So they liked what he could do as a 5th-year guy. Mason Ornelas, who you're talking about, the A&M transfer, a lot of these roles have yet to be determined. I mean, he could be a midweek guy. He could be a long reliever. Somebody could get hurt, and he could fill in potentially. So he's someone on the back end. Braxton Bragg is a sophomore righty who they're giving the ball to on Sunday. And now Nebraska doesn't play a lot of 4-game series.
They will this week.
They will this week, yeah. But moving forward this season, they don't play a lot of those. So it'll be interesting what his role eventually ends up being. But he was a guy who struggled last year, had a great summer, had a really impressive fall for them. Will Bolt called him his most consistent pitcher of the team the last 6 months. So he'll get a shot. You've got guys like Jake Buns, who was a reliever most of the time last year. He started some. Cody Frank, who is kind of a funky, he's got a lot of junk, I guess, to his different pitches that he throws out there. These are all midweek options, long relief options, those sorts of things. And you kind of go down the list. And we haven't even talked about the freshmen. Guys like Drew Christo, C.J. Hood, who were both top 150 overall national recruits who came in here.
Right.
And, we've talked about Christo some before, Sam, you and I
have.
And how he's not necessarily a topic of conversation too much. I think to me, that's one of the biggest signs that this is a deep pitching staff is they don't feel like he needs to be that guy. And as I wrote recently, when you go back, you look at when Nebraska gets a top 150 type pitcher like that, typically they end up being in the rotation right away. And you see that in the Big Ten, and you see that in college baseball. If you're really good, you end up in the rotation right away. Nebraska feels like they have the arms that they don't need to thrust him into that role right away. So I think that's another good sign that maybe what they see in practice actually ends up coming to fruition.
And then who is in the bullpen? The guys that you can Buns obviously I think is one of those, perhaps, maybe, I don't know. But who are the people who come in, setup man, closer? That's pretty common now in college baseball, just as it is in the major leagues.
Yeah. I mean, Colby Gomez is going to get first crack at closing, and that's a great luxury for Nebraska to have. I mean, he was an All-America, a freshman All-America level talent in 2019. Was hurt the last 2 years with a shoulder injury. He's back. By all accounts, has been impressive in their scrimmages and workouts. Beyond that, a lot's to be determined. I think Christo's a guy who could be a late inning, high leverage guy. They have some guys coming back from injury. Caleb Feakin is someone who's been pretty good. Tyler Martin. Some of the other names I mentioned will end up being bullpen sort of contributors as well. But they have 20 players on their roster that are listed as having of being at least able to pitch, and 12 of those guys are at least 30-year players. So there's a lot of arms. There's a lot of guys who've been around for multiple years, and it's just it's weird because, again, we talk about everything that they lose, but they actually bring back a lot of guys. And so the key is, can they develop? Can they step into a bigger role? And if they can, big picture, that says good things about what Nebraska baseball can be. And more specific to this season, it says they've got the arms to compete and do what they want to do.
To be clear, I think you can have a really good team and not have a great ace. However, there is a correlation between when Nebraska's had its best teams and it's had its best pitchers. Maybe that's causation, maybe it's correlation. But you go back and Shane Komine, Jabba, they had
Johnny
more
Dorn.
than had more than just Jabba on that team that went to the College World Series, but he was on it. Johnny Dorn, Friday Night Johnny Dorn. I think in 2008. I think the last time they were really good. And then with Erstad, I don't know that they had. I can't remember the guy's name. Kind of a goofball back in 2019. Can't remember his name. I'm not trying
Matt
to be
Waldron?
rude. Yeah, different guy.
Yeah.
But he was good. I mean, he was a pretty good ace. And then Povich last year was really good. I mean, he was one of the best Friday night starters they've had ever. I mean, I don't know if he was Komine level, but he was drafted in the second round for a reason. And so that'll be interesting to watch as it relates to the position players. Now, my understanding is that, and you can confirm this, is that Nebraska may be a little bit raw, but the potential to be really good is there. Like, this could be a really, really good offense.
Yeah.
If it maximizes.
Right. I mean, Will Bolt hinted, he didn't hint, he said this earlier this week, they're probably going to trade in some of the small ball stuff they did last year for more straight up hitting and guys who they think can, as he says, impact the ball and get extra base hits and things of that nature. So they probably will look a little bit more, like a, major league offense, if you want to say that, where you're not trading in outs to get a run, you're going for the big inning, which is something Darren Erstad's teams did later in his tenure too, but
and not always successfully.
Not always.
Teams.
Not always.
Yeah. He had a little bit more of a major league approach, and it was hot and cold.
That's right. So, but yes, I think the case for Nebraska as a top 25 team, the case for Nebraska as the Big Ten favorite, on paper starts with their infield. So, Max Anderson at third base, he's the reigning Big Ten freshman of the year. He's not eligible for the draft this year, but next year he's going to be, I think, pretty high up on a lot of boards. Bryce Matthews, who was the second baseman last year, moves over to short to fill in where Schwellenbach was. Those two, that's a great start on the left side of the infield. Griffin Everett behind the plate is a captain, somebody they feel like offensively is an asset. And then the right side's a little more unsettled. I think probably the one freshman you're going to see settle in right away is this Core Jackson, who's out of Canada. And Nebraska's starting a Canadian pipeline through another former Husker, Adam Stern, who's up there and sending players down this way.
We'll see if it works. I'm curious to see if it works.
Well, their top guy for the next class is probably from Canada too. Yeah. So it'll be fascinating to see how that translates. Jack Stile, I think, will be at first. He's been sort of compared to Scott Schreiber a little bit in that he's got some power potential to him. He was hurt for a lot of last year. And then the outfield is pretty wide open. They like Luke Sartori in center. He's sort of the Mojo Hagee, Jackson Hallmark type who's going to lay down some bunts and steal some bases. You probably see him toward the top of the order. And then you got Cam Chick, who's played some outfield. Leighton Banjoff, who was really good in the short 2020 season before he got hurt a lot of last year. You've got freshmen. They really like guys like Luke Jessen, who's a true freshman. Josh Caron's another name to watch, maybe as a DH too. So, again, I think depth is the theme there because a lot of Nebraska teams that I've covered in the last handful of years, you knew who the top six were going to be, but those bottom three in the order, it would always change. And there was this revolving door, and who's going to get it done? It's sort of like Nebraska running backs where, you put them out there, you hope somebody takes the job and runs with it. And they just never found that for a lot of years. They feel like they have too many guys now. So we'll see how that plays out in terms of depth too.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch. I do feel like at times the Erstad approach was kind of the John Sanders approach. And John was a long time ago, R.I.P., rest in peace. But, back then they had a metal bat. And, you could do things with a metal bat that was harder to do with the bats they're using now. And I did feel like at times you would go to a game and you'd watch Nebraska gap out, essentially. In other words, they'd hit balls into the gap that would die and caught, and it was loud outs. And so I'll be curious to see if they're able to really affect a kind of just hitting the ball out of the park. like the old Eddie Murray thing. Walk, sink, walk, three-run homer. The Earl Weaver philosophy, and maybe they can. Anytime that you go to that approach, as you well know, I don't know how much you follow baseball, Jimmy, but plate discipline becomes really important. Waiting for years becomes really important. Taking some walks becomes important. Striking out becomes important. Like, you're going to strike out sometimes because you're trying to do something with it. And then when you have a chance to hit one out, you hit it out. Like, it puts more emphasis on plate discipline, and then when you get one, you stroke it. What's interesting about that is I think in college baseball, there are times when you can put the ball in play and it works. Small ball is effective because the guys that are fielding the ball are not major leaguers.
Right. And
the catcher who's throwing the ball to second base, he isn't either. And so sometimes you can get away with some stolen bases. You can get away with some junk where, you're moving guys all over the field and you're trying to get a bunt down. You might get an out, or the guy might come up there and barehand it and throw it into the dugout. So I'll be curious to see how that goes. I think the best teams do it exactly the way you're talking about. So if you go back and watch some of the teams from the College World Series, I think that's true. Arizona just killed me watching them, constantly getting out of the box, constantly going back in. Like, I don't love that, but we'll see how it goes. From a schedule perspective, this is the first normal year. Mm-hmm. They play 56 games. Yes, 56.
Yes.
Yep. They play 27 conference games, correct? Or is it 24?
It would be 8 series times 3, so 24.
24. So more than half of their schedule is non-conference play. I don't think that's the case in the SEC. I think the SEC may be 30 or something like that. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But they try to emphasize non-conference play because you kind of know when you get in the Big Ten, there's going to be some series that hurt you. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about the Big Ten in a second. But when you look at the schedule, the top half of it, the first half of it, and then sort of the non-conference games they play in there, it seems pretty tough. It seems pretty competitive.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's a happy medium because you've had recent years where Nebraska's playing 4 games against Oregon State, and they lose 3, they lose 4, and it just kind of kills you. And then they've had years where you load up on the Northern Colorados of the world, and it doesn't really matter. And you're just trying not to lose a tough one. But
Jimmy, Darren Erstad used to have a relationship with the Angels, and they go down and play in this tournament down there, and they almost always drew Oregon State or hard teams that they couldn't beat.
I actually own a championship replica ring from Darren Erstad's World Series with the Angels. Fun fact.
There you go.
Fun fact.
That's good. So he had some relationship down there, and he would play a lot in California.
Yep.
And honestly, they were playing team. I mean, Oregon State beat them up pretty good a couple of times. So
yeah,
this doesn't have that flavor to it, but they're going to TCU next weekend.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of like a football schedule where, like, if you have 3 non-cons, you want to have one that's sort of the marquee non-con, and then you maybe have sort of your Patsy or your FCS level, and then you have maybe a middle level one. And I think this schedule sort of sets up that way where you have, Long Beach State is a top 25 team. They're coming to Haymarket Park in mid-March. TCU, like you mentioned, Sam, they're a top 20 team right now, favored to potentially be a national seed by the end of the year. But, I like their opening weekend. Sam Houston is a really, I think, ideal place to start. I mean, that's a team that's had winning seasons like the last 10 years. They're always good, never great.
Harville have a relationship with them. Did he coach there?
He was an assistant there with their current head coach, Jay Sirianni, who's a former Husker, actually.
Right.
So there's some connections there. But, yeah, I mean, it's true for Nebraska, and it's true for a lot of the Big Ten, is the month of February and early March is where you have to build up your RPI against those non-conference teams. And if you can win a series on the road against a decent team, that is the gift that's going to keep on giving as the season gets going. So, I think for Nebraska, those 2 early series are going to be their big ones. They've got BYU as one of that later in the season matchups in Lincoln that's going on there as well. New Mexico State's coming to town, which is kind of interesting. And then you have your midweeks against Creighton and UNO and Kansas State and teams like that too. So, I think it's right where Nebraska wants to be. It's not too hard. It's not too easy. And typically, I think with a schedule like Nebraska has, if they end up in the 35 to 40 win realm by the end of the year, I mean, they should be in the conversation to host, potentially.
I think this gives you a sense of what they want to do in recruiting. Their first 3 weekends are spent in Texas.
Oh, yeah.
So they're going to be in Huntsville, Texas, which is it's near Houston, obviously. Then the next 2 weekends after that, they're in Arlington. So are they playing TCU at the Rangers Stadium?
Correct.
Okay. And that's the new Rangers Stadium.
Yeah, the $1.2 billion Globe Life Field.
Yeah,
So it's not
World
Nolan
Series.
Ryan Stadium, and it's not the one that came after Nolan Ryan. It's the one that came after.
Yep.
Okay. So they're in a brand new field. They're playing TCU. I think that'll be a hard one. I think you're going to those. If they win one of them, I think that's great. And then after that, they play at UT Arlington and Northwestern State. Another Van Horn connection there. He used to be the coach
That's right.
there.
Yep.
The first home series is Long Beach State, and it's a 3-game series scheduled oddly against the state tournament in basketball. So that will be interesting in terms of crowd control. They'll have a ton of people at the game, but there'll be 20,000 people at the state tournament too, because the boys and girls are playing at the same time. So that'll be an interesting weekend.
No doubt.
In Lincoln for 3 days. But they play that, and then they have a midweek twofer against New Mexico State. That's tricky. Now, there's one where I think you think about it. As I was going through the schedule, I'm like, well, they're going to lose one of those, and they might lose 2. Because when you have sandwiched between it, 3 with Long Beach, 4 with Texas A&M, 3 with Texas A&M Corpus Christi, you're putting your number 5 and your number 6 pitcher. Yeah, I know. Your number 5 and your crispy. It would be great if it were. Although I don't know that it'd be a little sacrilegious, wouldn't it? Body of
Corpus Christi.
I'm a Christian.
I like that.
Yeah. So you have those two. You have those 2 series, and sandwiched in between it, you don't have Northern Colorado. Right. You have New Mexico State, which is a better program than the Mike Anderson Special, and so that'll be tough. And then they have SDSU, which is sort of the John Sanders used to schedule Peru State and UNK back in the day. That was cold. It's about 9 people at Buck Belzer, and it's mist and rain in about mid-February.
Late February, yep, exactly.
I loved it. Ugh. Then we'll go to the Big Ten. So the Big Ten poll came out today, and Nebraska was picked to win it. Michigan is number 2. I don't think that surprises anybody.
No.
They have a lot of talent. I was looking at their roster earlier this week. Iowa's number 3. So guess who they get at home this year?
Who do they get home this year?
Well, they get Michigan.
Yes.
And they get Iowa.
Yeah,
they
do.
get the 2-3
That's true,
teams
yeah.
at home for 3-game series this year. That's fortuitous. And they get Michigan early. They get them right away. So arguably the most important series of the Big Ten season comes in late March. Should be interesting, don't you think?
I do, yeah. And the number 4 team, Maryland, is actually the team I think is most likely to win the Big Ten on paper because of what they have back. Nebraska doesn't play them at all. So you're talking Michigan, Iowa at home. Maryland, they don't play. And then Ohio State and Indiana, they're totally resetting with the rotation. It's hard to say kind of what they'll end up being. But yes, the schedule does set up very well for Nebraska. And whenever I do these Big Ten projections, one thing you have to factor in is that so Wisconsin doesn't have baseball in the Big Ten, right? So you have 13 Big Ten teams. You play 8 teams and you miss 4. And that always, every year, is a factor when you look at how the conference race ends up. Who do you not play? And so, for Nebraska, they play a tougher Big Ten schedule. Maryland, one of the reasons I picked them to win it is because they avoid Iowa. They avoid, some of these other teams, that are probably going to be contenders.
And they avoid Nebraska.
They avoid Nebraska. So Nebraska misses Maryland, Penn State, Northwestern, Purdue, which, those last 3 teams are teams you would prefer to play. So Nebraska actually has a pretty tough Big Ten schedule overall. But yes, the teams that they get at home, definitely an advantage. I think when you start watching some of these BTN Plus games when Nebraska travels on the road, I mean, you're talking like a few hundred fans show up at a lot of these venues. Yeah. And so when those teams come here, and that was certainly the case last year, and they see 3,000, 5,000 fans slow clapping on every 2-strike pitch that their batters are taking, like, you hear pretty consistently that it's a different atmosphere that they're not used to. And so there is, I think Haymarket Park does provide more of a home field advantage than most Big Ten teams enjoy. So yes, it's a big deal that they're playing those teams here. And like you said, getting Michigan early as a team that still has some things to figure out, that's a benefit too.
We got to get you to more road games for football and basketball so you can kind of see the sheer difference between Haymarket Park and literally every other place. Not maybe every other place, but most of them. Michigan, for example, it's a good program, but their baseball stadium is kind of literally sandwiched between the softball stadium, and Michigan softball's awesome, and the football training facility. I think the Schembechler Center is on one side, and so the baseball stadium is sort of crapped into the middle of it, and they have like a little mini blue monster or something. I can't remember what they've got there, but the atmosphere is way different than Haymarket. Like Haymarket feels like a sort of a big park. Iowa's is down in like a gully over here on the other side of the, crapped out to the side of the Iowa wrestling facility, which is palatial and huge. And so like you see how other Big Ten teams have valued that program over the years, and it's just different than what Nebraska does. Indiana has a nice park.
They do. Yep.
So they have one of the
right
better
next to
ones.
the basketball center.
But a lot of these places do not. And so, like, Nebraska should, when you just look at the facility, should be good. You have Maryland number 1, and they have a tiny little stadium as well. Bandbox, you can hit the ball out of there. You have Maryland number 1, Michigan number 2, Nebraska number 3. So when you think about their record, so I put in the picks or in my Monday Rewind, I thought they'd go 38-18. They won't go 38-18 because they won't play 56 games because something will get rained.
Something will get rained, sure.
It's just a law. Remember the year Clemson went like 62-9 in 91 when they played Creighton? They played like 70 games, regular season games, and then Creighton kicked their ass. That was great. Anyway, Creighton note inserted into this moment. But they used to play more games in college baseball. They used to play 75. It was odd. So they play 56. I said 38-18, and I think I said in the league 17-7. Those are nicely perched at the 66% win rate, so 2 out of every 3. What do you think is a reasonable, adjustment or prediction?
Yeah, I think that is a good range to start with. I mean, I'm always been a big believer of the baseball adage that, like, everybody's going to win a third of their games, everybody's going to lose a third of their games, and it's what you do with that other third that makes all the difference. And so, Nebraska, I think on paper, is set to win a lot of those games with some of the pitching that they have, with some of the depth of offense, and not just the depth of offense, but the way that they can win games differently. So, like, if you're playing an ace, and man, you're not going to string 3 hits together off this guy, but maybe you can get a walk and a home run. And then you have another game where the wind is blowing in. You say, man, there's no way we're going to hit one out today. So let's lay down a bunt, steal second, hope for an error, and score that way. Like that was something that made them so good last year too, is they could adjust how they scored. They weren't one-dimensional in that way. So I think if they can do that, yeah, I mean that's right in that range. The other thing that I just wanted to mention too, when looking at the Big Ten this year, is it's a unique year because they didn't play midweeks last year. Right. So they had just the league-only schedule. So they were just playing every weekend, and typically you'll see the midweek starters from whatever team sort of gravitate to the weekend role as they go along in their college careers. Well, Nebraska didn't have that. They played midweek scrimmages against each other because the league wouldn't let them play. And so looking at the Big Ten, they lost. I think there were 37 starters last year who would have qualified for the ERA title. So they were regular starters for them. Only 12 of those 37 are back. 10 teams out of the 13 are replacing the majority of their rotation. So, like, if you have a guy, like a proven starter coming back, like, that immediately puts you at the head of the pack. That's why Maryland's up there with a guy like Nick Dean. That's why Michigan has 2.
Michigan's good. Should be really good.
Yeah.
They're
so,
not.
like,
I don't know why, but they should be really good.
So, like, that's why, people might say, why didn't I pick Nebraska to win it? And they very well could win the Big Ten again. They absolutely could. They could host a regional this year. But, like, to put them in the top 25, you have to assume a lot from what they lost last year. You have to assume that those pitchers, those starters, take that next step, and they may. But you also have to make a lot of other assumptions about people developing and filling into new roles, and you just have to make fewer of those, in my opinion, with Maryland and Michigan. But I think it's going to be a great race, and Nebraska should be right there at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I think you would agree that Nebraska's going to make the NCAA tournament this season, that you would project that.
Sure.
But, of course, the stated goal is host a regional. We've been burned, I think, to some degree as people who cover Nebraska, of hearing big goals and then not even coming close. I mean, not even close. It's like the opposite of the goal. You speak it into existence, and then the opposite happens. Mm-hmm. In this case, do you think it's more likely that Will Bolt is much closer to that stated goal than maybe football or men's basketball?
Yeah, because I mean they came close last year, right? Like I think in a normal year they would have hosted last year. Or if that sweep that they suffered against Rutgers, if that had happened like 2 weeks later because of how it all timed out with deciding regionals, I think they still could have hosted last year. I mean, they were that close to pulling that thing off. So, yeah, I mean, again, to me, it just comes down to, are they able to reload? Because all the top teams lose guys to the draft. They lose parts of their recruiting class, and Nebraska lost a really good outfielder who decided to go play college football. Like, if you can recover from that
Right.
and contend, you're in a great spot.
Yeah, they probably weren't planning on that, were they?
No. He was here throughout fall ball.
Was he good in fall ball?
When he made contact, he was. Yeah. So, yes, I think they could be close to that. And
Couldn't he have just played college football here?
I don't know that he's quite that talented to play college football here.
Where'd he play?
He went back to South Dakota State.
Well, shoot.
Oh.
Where Nebraska football's going. I'm a little cranky.
There's a zillion roster
Been a hard
spots.
week.
Certainly he could have taken a roster
The problem
spot,
with
right?
it is that if you give him any scholarship money, it defaults to football and it's full. So you can't give him any scholarship money. They got to be walk-ons both ways. Well, that's not quite true. If they hit the field, it's the Ryan Goodman rule.
Right.
If they hit the field, it becomes a football scholarship. I guess they can practice for as long as you want them to. And
Right.
They can play. They can practice. But the minute that they play a snap in a game, you are Ryan Goodman. You don't know who Ryan Goodman is. That's okay.
The regional thing, like Will Bolt said this before, and I think it makes some psychological sense, is like, if your goal is to win the Big Ten, then what's your like overt motivation for a lot of these midweeks and these non-conference games? But like, if your goal is to host a regional, you can't get swept by New Mexico State midweek. You can't drop a home series to Texas A&M Corpus Christi. Like, there's a certain like focus that comes with that goal that says you can't stub your toe. And so they had that mentality last year, and if that can translate to a regular 56 game season, then yeah, I think they'll be there to the end, and maybe provide people some psychological relief who are sort of beaten down by the football and the men's basketball and just praying for something to be happy about. I think Big Red's right there with a big warm embrace, and we'll just see how it goes.
I have three. I had two, but Evan just brought up a third. Baseball related things that I have been saving to the end because no one should care about what I have to say about this team. I'm here sitting in the back of the class shooting spitballs while Evan runs things. First of all, it's not just the people in the elevators. It's people on Twitter, like after every ugly basketball loss, there are people in my mentions saying, man, I hope you get to cover baseball just to see something. So like that ethos exists in strong numbers across the fan base. Second, to piggyback off my replica championship ring point earlier, very important, the Angels. Not only do I have the championship replica ring from that Angels World Series, I used to frequent, when I was like 6 when this happened, I used to frequent a bar. My mom played for a company softball team, and they would all go to this bar after the games, usually to watch the Angels playoff games. And I did a Troy Percival impersonation. So Troy Percival was the Angels closer, and he used to squint in at the catcher's glove, and so I used to pull one of those, and like there are pictures of me wearing like a Tavern on Main jersey doing the little Percival pose. The third thing, I actually do have a baseball take, so get ready for this.
Here we go.
One of my and it's not only is it a take, it's an analogy, so really strap in on this one. One of my takeaways from the NFL playoffs was just watching Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, all these like laser beam alien type quarterbacks. Justin Herbert's in this family too. It's just like, if you don't have one of those guys, you just got to feel helpless watching some of those games. And I think that's correlates to the ace conversation we had. For Nebraska to get where they want to go, super regionals, College World Series, etc., they're gonna have to get through some of those guys. There are a lot of game one starters that Texas A&M, Vanderbilt, SEC schools are gonna throw out at you that they kind of pencil in as wins. And if you can throw someone out there who can push those guys to even, Now we're having a different conversation about the baseball team. Yeah. Evan, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I was in on that.
Awesome.
That was good.
I think contextually, we always try to, when we cover the sports, we think context. With Nebraska football, it's, oh God, can they win 6 games? With Nebraska basketball, it was a different kind of context, and they've really fallen short of it. With baseball, I think it's gonna make the tournament. Would love to host a regional. To be honest with you, I think you can win a road regional if you're not going to an SEC school. I think that was, I think they got it, as you probably agree, they got screwed. with the pairing. They almost pulled it off, but it wasn't very fair. And if this year, when you don't have to take in travel considerations and COVID stuff like that, if they end up the number 19 team and they don't get it, and they go to the number 15 team, and let's say, or I don't know if I've got the numbers right there, 14 or whatever it is, and they're a 2 seed, and I don't know, somewhere in a smaller school and on the West Coast, they could win that.
Yeah. Well, D1 baseball projected them to be the top 2 seed and to travel to number 16 Oregon State in a regional.
And that's a loaded name because historically they've been impossible to beat there.
They're not as good as they were.
But they're not the same program they
not.
were 7 or 8 years
That's
ago.
true.
So that's interesting. I do think it's unfortunate that Nebraska often seems like the westward facing program that has to go out there. But they've played some. I think they go back down to Oklahoma City. They could get it done there. I mean, they can do that. So they almost did it the last time. So I think they have a chance. Let's talk briefly about basketball. Nebraska men's basketball. They last time I think they won a game.
Thumbs up.
Last time we spoke, they had not won a Big Ten game. Now they have. Then it just got boat raced.
They did.
At Iowa, and that was a very frustrating game to watch because I felt like that was, and I think Fred was frustrated. His post game, and I think some of the comments you put out there today were the same thing of what were my guys trying to do, doing what they were doing against a team that did what they were trying to do way better than they can. That said, Nebraska, when Fred Hoiberg got here, they wanted to play with pace. They have played with pace, even though they're not very good.
It's one thing they do. There's red numbers next to them all over Ken Pom, except for adjusted tempo.
Bad. They're a bad team that insists on playing fast, and when you do that, I think you have a hell of a hard time beating almost anyone.
It's a miscalc. I mean, that to me it tells me it's a miscalculation of talent, right? Because you play fast thinking that more possessions will be good for you because eventually your talent will win out. Right. Whereas, if you want to slow it down, that's an adjustment to, okay, we're not as good as this team. We want to limit the opportunities that they have to prove that they are better than us. So from that standpoint, it's a miscalculation of talent. It's also just I think a misunderstanding of what playing with pace means. I think Iowa, Fred used the term sped up. Iowa got Nebraska sped up, which they were turning the ball over. They were taking crazy shots. It's just Iowa got to the point where they were playing so fast that Nebraska kind of lost its marbles for a second there. They lost track of what they were supposed to be doing. And that's what Nebraska wanted to be. They wanted to do that to other Big Ten teams because the standard style of play in this league is slow. Purdue plays slow. They're the number one offense in the country, but they play slow. Ohio State plays slow.
Well, they have to. They got giants on the
floor.
Sure.
Say slow again.
Slow.
There.
Wisconsin plays slow.
A 7'4" guy can't run fast.
I hear you.
I mean, he can, but
it's the standard.
Apparently, Zach Edey can run very fast. He runs a 5-minute mile. But my point being,
Rutgers,
you have to play
Rutgers,
slow.
the people's champion, plays slow.
Yeah, they win games because of it.
Exactly. But Nebraska thought it's kind of there's a Hoiberg Frost parallel here where they thought they were bucking a trend. And they did buck the trend. It just doesn't matter.
Scott's tried to change. I mean,
for sure.
They have.
For sure.
They've tried.
But on the entry point, it's the same idea where Scott said, no, they're going to adjust to us. And Fred said, no, they're going to adjust to us.
Right.
And it
the
hasn't
first
worked out
year,
that
was kind of true. Even though they went 4-8 in the first year, I think by the end of the year, we were kind of looking around at each other and being like, this is going to be a pain in the ass for the Big Ten. This is not – these defenses are reeling. They were struggling. They were. It wasn't always perfect, but they were struggling. By the second year, it's like all those defenses figured Nebraska out. And then Nebraska had to change. And I feel like they have. They've adjusted a little bit. Basketball team, what's surprising to me is that it feels like they're still trying to execute a plan from November of 2021, 25 games into a terrible season, and somewhere in there, nobody has said, I will literally take you off the floor if you take a shot in the first 10 seconds. A theory I put out on radio today, and this is hyperbole. It's purposefully hyperbole. I said, if Nebraska had 3 possessions per half, where they did nothing but hold and pass the ball and the shot clock ran out, it would be better than what they're doing now.
On Sunday, for sure, yeah.
It would be better than what they're doing now, because at least they would have burned 95 seconds off the clock.
Well, and at the end of that shot clock violation, you get to set your defense.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so hard to watch that it's like you guys could just play Iowa football on the court. You could hold the ball, and then with about 3 seconds left on the shot clock, you could throw it to Verge. He could punt the ball into the stands.
So you would
reset the shot clock. I mean, to me, it would almost be like you could play football with it. I mean, I said this once during the season with Michigan State when Samari Toure was the punt returner, right? And he didn't know how to, What are they doing? It's the same thing here. I was watching the game on Sunday. I'm like, what are you guys doing? What do you do? Where is the disconnect of how can he not just say, guys, what are you doing? Trey, what are you doing? Why are you driving into the lane? 4 seconds into the possession, getting there. There's no shot. There's no shot. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? What's going on? What happened?
And if you want to go in and probe and see what's in there, that's fine. But you got to pull it out or kick it out or do something. There's not a plan B, which kind of goes to the bigger picture of this. When they drive to the basket, there's no plan B. It's I'm going in, I'm throwing this up, or I'm going to Lonzo Verge. Sometimes is like I'm going in, I'm jumping, and then either I'm shooting or I'm going to flail and throw some pass that he didn't plan to throw, right? And that when you were talking just now, I was thinking about something that Fred has said. And this, people are going to be tired of hearing this, but he said he keeps saying the last thing that I thought would be a problem with this team is making shots, shooting the ball, right? And this goes to what my theory about what happened with this season is they thought they were going to kick some ass on offense. They thought they were going to be, raining threes down against all these Big Ten teams and spreading them out and just impossible to guard. And defense, we'll figure out defense later. Defense caused a little havoc. They actually have been a pretty decent team at forcing turnovers, so credit where that's due, but they thought that, we'll be one of those football teams where we load up the roster on offense, we score 30 points a game, and then defense, we're going to be a playmaking defense, which is code for we get turnovers or we get a ton of points scored on us. Yeah, exactly.
I get it.
That's what they thought they were going to do. Mm-hmm. They couldn't score any points. They couldn't score to the level that they thought. They're the worst offense in the Big Ten. They're one of the worst 3-point shooting teams. Even with a recent, I think they're shooting average 35-ish% from three in the new calendar year, still in the 300s nationally in 3-point percentage. And when you build your whole identity around that and it flails to that level, what do you do? I don't know that there's a huge fix there.
Doing. You take the air out of the ball, and even if your players want to revolt. And here's the other thing: you got a defensive coordinator on the team that knows how. That's how he made his. That's how he made his stock and trade. And you can say a lot of frustrating things about Doc when he was the head coach at Nebraska, but that man knew how to win a basketball game. He could take his, which were small and slow and not very athletic, and go beat a really talented, way more talented team by simply playing a smart basketball game.
Baseline to baseline.
Dribble handoffs, top of the key weaves, down to 5 on the shot clock, short corner 10-footer from J.R. Strourbridge goes in. It's a killer possession. They'd play defense, the other team was, and it's like this 6'3" guy hits a little 10-footer. It's not beautiful. Or Paul Valander in the corner with 4 on the shot clock hits a 3. It was ugly, but it won. It won games. And I'm just confused as to what the... Watching the game in particular against Iowa, it was 14-13. It was a competitive basketball game, and they make a couple of plays. And it's it wasn't Verge. I was Trey. I was like, what are you doing?
Some Kobe in there too, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm like, there's no room to do whatever it is you're trying to do. You're getting the ball stolen. Is Iowa kind of chippy and cheap? Yeah, they are. Iowa's really good at letting a guy dribble past them, grabbing one arm and poking with the other hand. I get that. Fran McCaffrey's teams, and honestly, Lisa Bluter, the women's basketball, they're both good at. They're both good at being chippy and a little bit of elbow. We talked about this, that Iowa's good at volleyball rebounding. The guy, they got a guy that can barely jump off the ground, and all he's doing is sticking his arm up and popping the ball up in the air. And Nebraska's, meanwhile, trying to do form two-handed rebounds, and they're getting the ball popped out by some guy that's pushing him in the back while he does it. I see it. Little hand right there on the waist, and then he's popping the ball out. And it's almost like Nebraska comes into these games, we'd like to play as pure and clean a game as possible. And then Iowa comes in, and we're just going to mess with you the whole game and push you around until one of your players literally bombs one of our guys with an elbow. And that's what happens, Iowa committed, 65 fouls in that game. Probably got called for 15 of them, but you got to play through it. And it feels like it's frustrating to watch because it feels like Nebraska's losing games because of dogma. Like, well, our coach told us that we couldn't take a 10-foot shot, so we're going to run off the cliff and try to make a layup we can't make. It's hard to watch. It's aesthetically unpleasing.
Aesthetically unpleasing, which goes to the larger conversation. This is the point I've been making when making the radio rounds recently, is that it's one thing to be as bad as they are in the third year. I wrote on Sunday they have now lost 6 games this year by 20-plus points, which is the same number of games that they lost by 20-plus points in their first year with the roster that was the excuse roster. That was the, we'll give them a pass for that one. They only lost 3 of them last year. I mean, there were a couple of 18, 19-point games in there too, but only lost 3 of them last year. This was supposed to be the big push and fart noise. Like, it's the same thing. And that's the biggest problem with it is Trev Alberts cares, and he said it a bunch of times during the football season, cares not about wins and losses, cares about the contexts surrounding those wins and losses. The context is ugly. They're getting blown out. There's no easy to point to reason why these blowouts happen. Sometimes, this one was turnovers. Other times it's just been they gave in effort-wise. Purdue pushed them around. There's been 2 times where they've gotten absolutely bushwhacked, embarrassed off the court within like 15 minutes, and Fred came on and said it wasn't an effort thing, and I kind of believe him.
I agree with him.
It was a turnover thing. They just lost their minds. Purdue, they got pushed around. Everyone got into foul trouble within 5 minutes.
Jimmy is totally right. I'm telling you, there are people who are going on Twitter and saying that they're like not trying hard.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you're not really watching the game, are you? Or you might be watching it, but you just want to be negative to be negative. And I get that, but oh no. In some ways, this is worse. Like, there's been moments when they haven't played hard. I've showed you the video of one guy turning away from the basket as Bryce shot a 3-pointer. I want to get into that, but I mean, it was laughable.
Yeah.
There's been effort issues, but Sunday was like watching a group of dogmatic adherents doing something that they shouldn't be doing, and almost like as is to say, well, you said this is what we need to do. I'm like, you don't need going all the way into the lane to get blocked or to get stolen. Why don't you pull up and try to hit a 13-foot jumper? And there's a larger point here in that I appreciate the way that Fred wants to play basketball. And I get that there is an argument to be made for this weirdly shaped hourglass of the shot map, where everything is inside the restricted circle. And then you have this vast, Gobi-sized desert of no shots at all. And then all of these shots around the 3-point line. And I'm telling you, it's going to kill the sport. You got to find a way. You got to find a way to reinstitute, whether you got to put that 3-point line out to the 27-foot mark, I don't know. But you've got to find a way to get guys to be able to make 14-foot shots anymore. Because what we're watching at Nebraska is not just like a bad team, and the thing that's bothered me is there's an implication that these are like bad people. And I don't think that's true at all. I don't think Alonzo Verge is a bad guy. I think they're all
CJ came out and said today, like, we've been frustrated with stuff.
They're good people.
But when we talk to each other, it's all positive interactions. Yes. They don't have any bad guys on the team.
No, I think these are good guys. I think they are good guys who are maybe not as talented or making as many shots as they could, who are trying to execute what I would describe as a very rigid system. And I don't know what this team would look like if they were shooting more 14-footers. I don't know. I know it's a bad shot according to analytics, and you both know me. I believe in analytics. But this thing isn't working. Like, it's hard to watch because it's like you're taking shots, and you talked to Thomas Filianco, who is Bryce McKewon's trainer, and it was, I think, a good story you wrote on Bryce. And he said one of the things Bryce needed to stop doing was taking Steph Curry-level shots. like 34-foot
Right.
threes.
He's kind of stopped doing that, kind of.
But the point being there's like 3 people in the world who can do that.
Right.
And I'm a Portland Trailblazers fan, and I don't even like when Damian Lillard does it, except for the one time when he beat the Thunder. I don't like watching that. These heave-hoes from 40 feet out. They're neat once.
Well, I mean, neat when they go in. When they don't go in, it's like, well, what did we really accomplish on that possession? Yeah.
And Nebraska had multiple possessions like that against Iowa, where it's just like coming down and, okay, just go shoot.
Well, that was the whole, like, Keisei Tominaga is going to be this big ball of energy because he's going to make 30-footers, and everyone's going to, people still, he still does get a pretty nice applause when he comes off the bench, but he's missing a lot of those 30-footers. So,
yeah. There's just something about the sport that's got, I feel it's got
I appreciate you wearing the Charles Barkley hat here. That was all fantastic.
Okay.
I don't necessarily think that it's like they need to be shooting more 14 to 15 footers, maybe a couple more. I just think it's more like you just don't have to. You can pass. That's the other option. It's not layup. It's not go in and flail at the rim, maybe get a call, maybe get a call, maybe don't get a call, or mid-range jumper. Sorry, Evan's laptop. It's go in there, maybe you stop, and this is what Fred preaches them, jump stop, take a look around, survey the playing field, and pass somewhere else.
Right.
Keep the line moving. I think it's more that. It doesn't like I think the dogmatic point is has validity to there's like it seems like there's like a binary, either I'm shooting a 3 or I'm driving in. The third option is you can pass. You can keep this cog rolling. That's what it's supposed to look like.
Well, yeah, it's
There's
the beautiful game thing. I get it.
Get it. That's not happening enough.
I get it.
Or when
I
it is,
understand
like,
it.
they're not.
But it ain't soccer. It's
Right.
basketball. It isn't. There isn't 10 guys on the field, and the field's not 245 yards wide. It's small. It's a small court. Maybe you got to make the court bigger. I don't know. When I watch women's basketball, I like the aesthetics of women's basketball more, especially with Nebraska because they're a much better team than the men. But they can dribble around people. We're getting to the point in men's basketball where the sport is so good defensively and the players compress the court so much, people can't dribble anywhere. So they're stuck at 37 feet or you're LeBron. And you literally can just jump so high and dunk over anybody. And that, to me, the sport I remember in the 80s and the 90s, it was fast. People made shots. Like Bryce, they could make a shot off the backboard, and it was like a runner, and it was like there was aesthetics to it, or there was a baseline jumper from 15 feet. It wasn't all like, okay, he's going to make a 3 or he's going to get a dunk. And, like, I'm not trying to go on an old man rant here. I'm saying that, like, there are teams that can do this. They can, and they do it, and they often win. But something's got to change in the sport. Something has to change. Maybe it's making the court bigger. Maybe it's taking that three-point line out so far that it disincentivizes people from shooting the shot. That may be how far where it needs to go.
You know what that would do, though, is that people would create more space, like you're saying, but it would be because there would be even more incentive to put more three-point shooters on the court to make sure that you have to stay on those guys. That's what creates the space, is having shooters on the court.
I think there's a line where there would always be a line where, in theory, you could disincentivize putting them on the court. Now, of course, you don't want to be ludicrous, but you could say no shot's going to count for 2 or for 3 unless you make it from the other side of the half-court line. And then it would stop. It would stop. They'd be like, well, nobody can do that. But, like, I'm a golfer. I like golf. Bryson DeChambeau is a good DeChambeau. There's a good example. He hits the ball a long way. He's into science, all the rest. Tiger Woods was just somewhat this way. Tiger was a much better player than DeChambeau, but he won a major golf tournament, destroying the ball, hitting it 370 yards into the rough, but hitting it so close to the green that they call it bomb and gouge.
Happy Gilmore. Yeah.
And what they have learned about how to defend that isn't actually to grow the rough longer. It was to maybe, in some cases, bring the rough down so that a bad drive rolls into the trees or you have to figure out ways to change the sport. And I just wonder, Nebraska's team prompts this in me, like, would the sport be a little bit better if you made the court a little bit bigger?
But to your point, I mean, it's not like we're watching a bunch. I mean, like, the Golden State Warriors were a little bit like this, but the Bucks and Suns, like last year's finals, they're playing pretty like Devin Booker was hitting mid rangers. Chris Paul is making mid rangers.
I think it's going to well, and the other pieces I think it's going to come back.
And the other thing is we
talked about this Baylor and UCLA.
Yes, right. They have guys who can.
That's what they did last year.
Right. And in the Big Ten, it's not like there's no revolution. Like the Big Ten's still doing the Big Ten. Like guys are still like Michigan State. This is a little bit like the dichotomy of the pro game and the college game. Michigan State like runs off ball actions for Max Christie to shoot 18-footers. That does not happen in pro basketball. It just doesn't. That is a Tom Izzo has been doing that for 20 years and it's been working, so he kept doing it. That is like a relic of that just doesn't happen in pro basketball. So it's not like that stuff's going away. Nebraska might need it. The sport, I think, is fine. Nebraska might just need to change a little bit.
Well, I think there's problems with the sport that are going to increasingly come because the defenders are getting better.
Three-pointers are like the attempt rate is still skyrocketing every year. I hear you on that front.
Because they don't know what to do. The defenders are so good, I think, that the three-pointers just keep going further and further and further back. It just feels anyway. Rutgers is a good example of a team that
Rutgers
plays college
so
basketball.
Fun.
They're not. I don't know that any of their guys are going to be stars in the NBA.
Oh no, Ron Harper Jr. is like a second-round pick.
But we're talking about guys that ISO a lot. They dribble around.
We got Paul Mulcahy is out here shooting 29% from three, but he can throw funky passes and get his way into the lane. Why can't
Nebraska be that? And my point, my argument for that, I think the reason that they're not that is because they have a vision. And the vision is this super high ceiling, and it is this like Steve Kerr like pinnacle of basketball stuff. Like we aim to be. The question that I sometimes have is winning games the priority? If it was, you wouldn't have an adjusted tempo of 12th in the country, would you?
That's a fair point. I think it's also they're trying to the counter to that. I think is they're trying to build a culture. Like for example, yes, they could win. 2 or 3 more games maybe this year if they played slower, but everyone they're recruiting, like they're not making that wholesale change. Maybe that's what you're arguing, but they're not going to make that wholesale change, so they can't do that when they've been selling all these recruits on come play pace and space basketball, right? And to your point about Rutgers, I just want to say this again. This is just like if you look at Rutgers' schedule, they've beaten 4 straight ranked teams. They're the only team in the Big Ten that has beaten Wisconsin, Ohio State, Illinois, Michigan State, and who's the 5th team? Purdue, Purdue's the other one.
Purdue's coming up. Right?
What they just did, they beat 4 of those teams in a row just now. What they did before that was lose to Minnesota, who had 7 available players, lose to Maryland at home, where they're very good, and Maryland has 3 conference wins. Should have lost to Nebraska. We all saw that game. Kobe Webster, not even just the Kobe Webster free throws. Nebraska was up. They should have been able to hang on to that lead. They didn't. And then they lost to Northwestern. They were down 24. Came back, forced overtime, lost to Northwestern. Well, doesn't make any sense. Fantastic. Fantastic stuff.
Now, again, I love college basketball. I've loved it a long time. Part of the weakness of college basketball is once you know you're in the tournament and you know you're not going to be a 1 seed or you're not playing for the 1, losing a game or 2 is probably not the worst thing in the world. In fact, it might be good. It might be good for you to lose a couple of games before you get to the tournament. So much is back-ended into the NCAA tournament. Illinois would rather lose 2 or 3 games now than do what they did last year and lose to Loyola. And that's part of the story. By
the way, Loyola, another team that just mucks it up.
Right. The great thing about college football is teams can't do that. They can't do it. Alabama had to win against Auburn. They had to have Tank Bigsby run out of bounds. They had to have it happen.
Yeah, you're on the bubble every week.
That's right. Mm-hmm. That's what's great about it. You can't lose. And in basketball, there's these moments where it's like, you know what? I just don't know if we're going to bring the will tonight because we played 30 games already or whatever it is. And, maybe it'll help us to lose a game here and then load management here. And there's things in basketball that make it not like football. And I just feel that somewhere in there they may have to do something with the court. You don't think the sport would be better if they made the court bigger?
I think you might, again, I think we would just see deeper threes.
No.
I really do.
You wouldn't change the 3-point line. You would make
the court bigger. Mm-hmm. It'd create more offense, but we're already in like an offensive boom. I mean, the teams that have proper spacing, it's really hard to guard those teams right now. I think if we had a college coach sitting in here, they would be screaming at you saying no. It's already hard enough to play defense. All of the rules are tailored. I mean,
that's true.
This is more of an NBA thing, but all of the rules have been tailored towards offense. This year it's a little more physical, but most of the rules have been tailored more towards offense and they're good with the court being the size it is right now. I think that's what
that
coaches
is fair,
would tell
that
you.
There's a lot of
coaches
there's a lot
are
of
constantly
hand-checking
complaining
and all that
about
stuff, and
yeah.
No, there's no question. And the sport is in a better place than it was in 2001 when Wisconsin and Michigan State were playing in the Final Four, and it was 42-40 because everybody's putting everybody in a headlock. I get that, but all right.
Hey, do you want to touch on the women briefly? I mean, just
briefly.
Put in perspective what they did against Indiana, like
We
what
gotta
that
get out of here
means,
soon.
what that means for them. Maybe we can wrap it up.
Well, I think they have good players. I think players is part of the conversation, right? So, they have good ones. They have, one of the 5 best guards in the Big Ten, and then maybe one of the 15 best guards in the Big Ten. And I'm not exaggerating when I say Jaz Shelley is really that good. I think she's really, really good, and does some things that help the team. And again, it's probably more possible to do in women's basketball. She's able to dribble in and out of places and come out the other side and reset the offense without having to pass it. They're able to do that a little bit more often.
That's a skill. Being able to keep the dribble alive is a skill.
And it's easier, though. She can go all the way across the baseline and come out the other side and go to the top and then back down and then back, all that stuff. But she keeps her dribble really well, so she's really, really special. They have a three-player rotation in the post. That helps. So they've got the players. And I think the other piece, I'm not trying to be glib or to be, whatever. Unhappy families are always more interesting to break down than the happy ones sometimes. But they have really good chemistry. And that chemistry was built in a unique way, in the sense that the older players on the team I would describe as pretty somewhat serious and a little bit introverted and a little bit like basketball lifers. Jaz Shelley is a basketball lifer. She's been doing this for a long time. She can play for the Australian national team one day and probably in the WNBA. And then the younger players on the team, who sometimes can be the more driven, and they had this a couple of years ago where they had a crew of seniors or freshmen who were really driven and sort of intense and all that. The freshmen they have on the team, while good, are also the life of it. So Alexis Markowski is the life of the team. She is on the one hand a very, very good player and tough and strong and a good post player for women's basketball. On the other hand, she makes people laugh. Some of their other freshmen do the exact same thing. They're funny and they're lighthearted, and they make the older players laugh. And that combination is just what that particular team needs. They have that sort of balance. I think Nebraska volleyball, which is elite, it was a little different, actually, and that some of the older players, I think if you talk to Lauren Stivrins or Nicklin Hames very long, you're going to find out they're really funny, dynamic, big personalities who can just basically function in any sort of social setting. They're really good at that. And some of the younger players on that team are really intense. And, they're intense. They're deeply driven and a little bit inward in that way. This women's basketball team's a little bit worse, and that the freshmen have created this sort of bench mob, and it's kind of goofy. It's not narcissistic or over choreographed. It's kind of goofy, and it gets the other players laughing. And people, they yell positive stuff to each other. They've had teams in the past where they didn't say much at all, and they've got that going. So I think the biggest piece for that team is they've got good players, and we don't need to break down how they're good, but they've got good players, and they've got the chemistry piece that makes everybody feel good. Now, here's down the stretch, if people are talking context, they're an NCAA tournament team now. They are. I mean, they beat Indiana, they beat Michigan, they've got 6 quad 2 wins. They're going. They'll win 3 or 4 down the stretch here. They might lose one. They might lose tonight. But they'll be a 6, 7, 8 seed. In women's college basketball, come hell or high, you want to stay off the 8-9 line. Mm-hmm. You do not want to play a 1 seed, because oftentimes those 1 seeds are really good. They're going to beat you. So if you can get in that 7, in the 6, 7, or even 10 or 11, those are the places to be, because generally speaking, you're going to play some teams that you can beat. and teams that can beat you. And so we'll see where they end up there. They have a potential to be a Sweet 16 team, but they got to get the right draw. And if they do that, that'd be really fun. It'd be really fun to see them get to the second weekend of the sport. Right now, 7 seed in Ames looks about right. Iowa State's going to be a 1 or a 2, 2 or a 3, and it looks about right for Nebraska to go to a small pod with Iowa State, old rival, Bill Fennelly's still there, and maybe Missouri. So Nebraska might play Missouri in 1 in the first round game and Iowa State in the second with 10,000 Iowa State fans there, and it'd be just great. That would be terrific.
Yeah.
And we'll see if that happens.
Real quick, do we want to, because it's going to be stale by the time next time we record, one take from the Adrian Martinez interview.
Your take is?
My take is he had a nickname for like everyone. It's like Coach Verdue, except for Frost. Frost was just Frost.
Okay.
I'm just putting that out there.
I didn't think it was as big a deal maybe as a lot of the conversation made it out to be. I thought it was a detail that was somewhat interesting. I honestly didn't put too much stock into a lot of what the podcast was. There was some detail, but I think it just kind of reinforced what we knew, that he was a gamer and that, now he's not here anymore.
That's an interesting take. I think Frost came up with most of the nicknames himself, and so somebody would have had to give him a nickname, and his nickname is Frosty. And that was given to him.
Verduzco's like the only guy who called him that.
Yeah, well, not a lot of people did.
No.
Now, some of the old school Huskers do. Like I've heard that from other people before. But I think the reason that Frost didn't have one is because he's the one that gave most of them out, and I think he's good at that. Mm-hmm. There's things about Scott that I like a lot, and that's one of them. I think he's always pretty down to earth. I don't know if I had a take. I feel for him. As it related to the jaw, he was a good soldier, a good kid. I think there was probably a thing left out. He said, Coach Frost wanted me back, all that other stuff. I think that's probably true, but I think I'm confident that I know that Martinez was basically told, we're going to the portal. So if you come back, yeah. So I think that the breaking point there, the divergent point was, we're not running it back unless you can beat out whoever we're bringing, and we might bring 2. And you need to know that. And I think, and on top of that, I don't know if he's going to be in spring camp or not, all those things. So that's the thing that I think he didn't, say, is that I think Nebraska was ready.
You told me that the athlete was filtered? Is that what you're saying? Athletes unfiltered, the athlete was filtered.
Well, he did it to him. I would just say this, that I think Nebraska, at the end of the day, came to a conclusion that was not so different from the conclusion that sports writers came up with, which is when you zoomed all the way out and you looked at the totality of the 4 years, most out of the 10 people I might talk to about Husker football, 9 would say, I want to see Frost with a new offense. I want to see a new quarterback. It was just, the relationship had run its course, and I think Nebraska actually, by saying we're going to look at the portal, knew what would come. So everybody I've talked to about this is there's a few people that just get rid of Frost, but most people said, I want to see Frost with a new offense and a new quarterback. And that's exactly what we're going to see. So, as it turned out, I think I think they've done many of the things that I think most people would have prescribed them to do who don't know a thing about football, including me.
I'm with you.
You're our host today, Sam. Take us out.
I am. That's right. I forgot. Okay.
We started so long ago.
Yeah. This has been a long journey. I took us off the track with basketball. I don't care. It needed to be said. It was on my heart.
Needed to be said.
For Jimmy Watkins and Evan Bland, I'm Sam McKewon. This is the Pick 6 Podcast. We will be back next week to discuss Nebraska spring football, previewing the earliest starting spring football camp in the Big Ten. We will talk about Husker spring football. I think it's the earliest. And we'll recap week 1 of Nebraska baseball, and we'll preview TCU. Since you're going on the road, we'll probably do that podcast a little earlier next week, earlier in the week, so that you can get down to Arlington. And we appreciate your time, Husker fans. Thanks.